Hello fellow YouTube friends, followers, fools and flabbergasters, my name is Mason and it's time for another MMO review. In this video I'll take a closer look at Guild Wars 2 and compare it to two other MMOs I've played, Elder Scrolls Online and New World. Especially with the imminent release of End of Dragons, I think it is a good time to talk about reasons for why I think that Guild Wars 2 is a pretty overlooked MMO that shines in a lot of important aspects compared to others and deserves a lot more attention. As a PvE focused player, I will place emphasis on that aspect of the game, even though I think that Guild Wars 2 also has a lot going for it in terms of PvP as well, since it includes large scale PvP through world versus world, competitive PvP with tournaments, and customizable private PvP sessions. It also balances PvP separately from PvE, which is a huge plus in my opinion. Especially large scale PvP, however, suffers from the pervasive performance problems that many other MMOs also have. The tone on this video will be mostly positive, because I simply find that there are a lot of things the game does right. There are things it doesn't do right, like the lack of consistency of instance PvE content over time or a very restrictive add-on policy, but overall I do not have a lot of big concerns. And with End of Dragons, even more content will be added to the game, so now is a very good time to take a look at it. But without further blabbering, let's dive into it. Reason number one is class identity and theory crafting possibilities. As is typical for MMOs, Guild Wars 2 uses different classes that you choose when you create a character. You have 9 classes that have 5 core specializations and 2 elite specializations, where each of the elite specializations adds another weapon that respective class can use. You need the respective expansion to unlock elite specializations. If you want to use the elite spec Daredevil on Thief, you need Heart of Thorns, while Path of Fire includes Deadeye, for example. With End of Dragons, each class gets another elite specialization for a total amount of 3. You can use 3 specializations simultaneously, out of which 1 can be an elite. This results in an incredible amount of different playstyles within each class, and thus a lot of options to theory craft around, which is my favorite part of MMOs. Trying out different builds in various scenarios to see what works and what doesn't. Which builds are easygoing, which ones have a steeper learning curve. A Guardian, for example, can be played as a condition-based firebrand, a heal firebrand, or a quickness support firebrand, but also as a bursty power dragon hunter or a fast-paced willbender, for example. That doesn't even take into account that for each of those you also have different options for the weapons you use, and each of the specializations comes with a unique set of skills that only they can use. This creates a very distinct feeling when playing different classes and even within the classes. A Tempest Elementalist uses one element fully at a time and is simpler to play with a lower damage ceiling, while a Weaver uses all elements in quick succession and is harder to play with a higher damage ceiling. On top of that, the skills of each weapon are unique per class. A Renegade, for example, using a shortbow will have an entirely different shortbow skill kit than a Ranger or a Thief using one. Elder Scrolls Online, on the other hand, has streamlined classes and specializations over the last years. Skills, sets and passives now provide both stamina and magicka-based stats. This can be seen as positive since it reduces complexity and facilitates balancing classes, but it also results in partially the same skill bars and set items as best in slot on all of them, particularly in PvE. This is also due to the fact that each class can use each weapon and weapon skills are the same on every class. In Guild Wars 2 you will use a certain attribute combination very often, like Berserker or Viper, because they are mathematically best in slot, but that doesn't bother you because you have enough class identity, so you don't need different gear choices across classes. Every magicka-based damage dealer in ESO will use a morph of Blockade of Fire, for example, simply because it is available to everyone and does great damage when paired with the Maelstrom Inferno staff that you can use perfectly from the backbar. Compared to these two, New World is even worse. There are no classes and the skill set you have available is solely defined by your weapons, and the effectiveness of the weapons is defined by your stats. Due to this, I felt like I always do the same thing. With just 6 active skills, it gets redundant pretty quickly, and you have many windows during which you will find yourself just doing light or heavy attacks. The speed does increase in more difficult content since you can improve that via gear later on, and swapping between weapons becomes more important across different expeditions on high levels. Nonetheless, I really think that New World could use another system that adds some clearly defined distinction to characters. Now it's not all rainbows and fairies here for Guild Wars 2. A class system that is as complex as Guild Wars 2's is of course hard to balance because it can include a lot of things and synergies between stuff that can be broken powerful. Despite that, in instance PvE, pretty much all elite specializations are viable in at least one role. so they will get the job done, but you usually have a much easier time with a particular combination compared to other alternatives, because they supply more boons, damage or survivability, meaning higher win rates in hard content like raids or fractals of the mists. Nonetheless, I have yet to encounter an MMO that has so many different ways to play a single class and such a clearly defined class identity. And unless you go for speedrunning raids or challenge mode fractals, there are many different ways to succeed. Alright, moving on to achievements and itemization, reason number 2. In Guild Wars 2 you grind differently. There are comparably few incentives to just mindlessly grind the same thing over and over, especially because many things are time gated. The itemization system in Guild Wars 2 is not centered around randomness and loot tables as much, but includes many different tokens, or currencies if you will, that you accumulate when you play the game. This can be quite hard to manage and annoying if you want shiny stuff quickly, but it incentivizes doing many different things at the same time instead of the same thing repeatedly. In New World, for example, the itemization is tied to a lot of randomness and achievements do not matter for anything in-game. Most of the things you do in New World do feel like a tedious grind, which is why I couldn't keep myself from logging off after short time frames, and even leveling to level 60 felt like a drag. It's all just kill this, search chests for that, etc., without any meaning or excitement about items I received. This critique isn't new, and if you like that type of game, New World isn't bad. Instead, in Guild Wars 2 you have long-term projects that require you to complete stepwise achievement collections, for example for the mounts like Roller Beetle, Griffin or Skyscale, or any of the legendary items like weapons, armor, etc. What I particularly like about this system is that for anything aside from a few items like special infusions, there is always a safe way to acquire it if you invest a specific amount of time. Ascended armor can be obtained through pretty much all game modes by gathering up different currencies. It can also randomly drop in several game modes as well, but relying on that is actually much slower than doing it the safe way, so the random loot tables are more of a gimmick in Guild Wars 2. Generally, the harder the content you do is, the faster you will acquire high-end gear. Challenge mode raids will provide a lot of currency and high loot table chances for ascended items, while strike missions pre-End of Dragons require you to run a lot of them until you have enough currency. Again, this system isn't perfect. Some of the collections require you to do tedious tasks you already did again, even multiple times. So before you do anything in the later stages of the game, try to look up on the wiki whether the achievement you're going for also has other collections you might be able to unlock before, so you can beat 2 or more birds with one stone. Also, some of the collections are just needlessly fluffed up. Like, why do legendary armor pieces after the first set cost twice as many legendary insights? Is it not enough to kill 150 raid bosses for a full set? Does it have to be 300? And why did I have to do the most obnoxious jumping puzzle Chalice of Tears 3 times for different collections? While Ascended and Legendary Armor share the same stat density, legendary items have the ability to change their attribute at any time outside of combat and can be used on all of your characters through the Legendary Armory. They are a lot of effort to craft, but also give crafting a long-term purpose and provide a large amount of convenience. And also, look how shiny! Some of the legendary weapons can also be sold on the trading post for a lot of money. It is certainly a matter of preference here, but I personally 100% prefer the collection and currency-based itemization over the randomness that other MMOs have. ESO used to be quite grindy, but has done several quality of life improvements lately, such as the set collections and curated set item drops in dungeons and trials and account-wide achievements. But there are still some mindless grinds in the game that involve RNG with a very low drop chance for items you basically need in PvE, like the antiquity leads for mythic items. In New World, the loot you get from crafting and PvE drops is randomized as well, so that if you are looking for a particular bonus via drops, it'll take you a long time to get the item you want. In crafting you can predetermine the bonuses through crafting mods, but the gear score, so the power of the item, will always be random within a specific interval based on your crafting skill and expertise afterwards. While this isn't that bad, you also only have a chance for the item you craft to be of legendary quality, so you never know how many materials you will actually need to get the item you want, and you will need a lot of materials, so there's another grind there. Moving on to open world and instanced content, probably the biggest promoting argument for Guild Wars 2. While Guild Wars 2 is 10 years old and certainly does not have the prettiest open world compared to the others, it certainly has the best content in open world out of all MMOs I've played. New World, for example, is the opposite. It's incredibly pretty, but shallow, while Guild Wars 2 looks decent enough and is full of content. ESO is like the middle ground between them, but open world there is stupidly easy once you understand the basic game mechanics, which is why I can't really enjoy that anymore. When we look at the map of Tyria, it is incredibly large. The game includes over 60 zones, 7 raid wings for 10 players with at least 3 boss encounters in each of them, strike missions for 10 players, 8 dungeons, 100 different versions of over 30 fractals of the mists, which are endgame small-scale PvE, somewhat dungeon-like. End of Dragons adds another 5 open world zones on top of that, plus a few more strike missions. What makes open world stand out in Guild Wars 2 are the event dynamics. You do not have the typical system where you go to someone, they tell you to fetch something or kill something, etc. On a side note, that's basically all that New World is at this point. In Guild Wars 2, zones include different regions or subzones in which you have renowned hearts. For these you need to complete smaller tasks that can be seen as the more repetitive, tedious ones, like kill zombies, gather up some resources, do an emote contest, whatever you can imagine. More interesting are the dynamic events and meta event chains. These occur based on timers. For example, world bosses or meta events can be done only every few hours. These events usually are woven into the main or side stories and involve a whole map population, or a part of it, to do tasks together, leading to hundreds of players having the same goal. In Dragon's Stand, for example, you need 3 squads of players to separately advance across the map towards the lair of one of the elder dragons, and then fight it together when they succeeded. There's also a pretty hilarious metal concert meta event with original songs even. Have a listen. If a particular step of an event chain fails, the rest of the chain is usually not available anymore. This meta event system should be a core part of any MMO, and I can't understand why others have not adapted similar things. New World is basically a renowned heart simulator on steroids at this point, and ESO also doesn't have anything comparable to this, unfortunately. The only thing it has are random world event spawns like dragons or dolmens, but they are not involved in a greater map-wide narrative of some sort. This also leads open world, particularly the later game zones, to always provide you with something to do. I often find myself phasing out from some kind of collection I'm doing because there's a meta going on, and I join that instead. After playing Guild Wars 2 open world, other open worlds always feel empty to me. You just see that the world has been created with passion by the designers, and the effort they put in really shows. But that is not all. Open world is often actually challenging. It is hilarious to see newer players getting annihilated by hero point bosses in Heart of Thorns or bounties in Path of Fire. You can't reliably cheese an event passively by just being there, because events scale with the amount of players around. The more players, the more deadly events become. And just so you know, dead bodies also count, so if you die during an event, respawn and come back, because otherwise you're just dead weight. Also, people will call you out for doing nothing, so be prepared for that. What makes Guild Wars 2 stand out further are the mounts and general map design. Back when I played ESO, I always thought, why would I need a flying mount? I get along just fine. Then I played Guild Wars 2 and found out that mounts can drastically enhance gameplay, not only because you move faster and more vertically, but also because they can be a core factor of open world and instanced PvE design. Newer zones in Guild Wars 2 and some raids are designed for players that have mounts and a lot of masteries unlocked. More on these later. They are incredibly vertical, include several layers, a lot of different mechanics that mounts can engage with, like the Jackal portals for example. If you haven't tried the Griffin mount in Verdant Brink yet, you have missed out on so much flying fun. A downside of Guild Wars 2 is, as I mentioned in the beginning, the lack of consistency. ESO has a clear and repeated content fundament, one chapter every year including a 12-player trial, 2 dungeon DLCs and another zone DLC. In contrast, it seems like ArenaNet just didn't know what to do with instanced PvE. There are raids, strike missions, fractals, dungeons, and they all come with their own currency systems. Raids involve a training process and have noticeable gatekeeping mechanics, kill-proof, because they have a pretty high failure rate in pug groups. As a remedy, ArenaNet introduced strike missions with the Eidbrut Saga DLCs, but they simply weren't challenging enough to keep endgame players engaged with them. They are really easy aside from the Bone Skinner. With End of Dragons, they went for a middle ground by introducing new strike missions that also have challenge modes, so it is interesting to see how these turn out. Overall, you get a whole lot of PvE content for a fairly low price in Guild Wars 2. I've been playing it for over a year and have crossed the 4-digit number of hours played, and I still haven't nearly done everything the game has to offer in PvE, let alone PvP. Reason number 4 is the combat style. Guild Wars 2 uses a unique style of combat that employs individual cooldowns per skill and involves placing AoE with the mouse cursor while moving freely with WASD. Since you have access to a lot of buttons and skills later on, you need to carefully think about the assignment of these on your keyboard. While the style of controls in the game is unique, I just couldn't get used to the mouse-based AoE placement, so I swapped to action cam mode immediately. This puts the reticle in the middle of your screen and makes controlling your character similar to other third-person MMOs like ESO or New World. Moving over from ESO, it also took me a bit of time to get used to the individual skill cooldowns, but after playing it for a while I actually prefer it over ESO's global cooldown based system. It makes your actions have more impact, since you can only activate a stun, block, stun break or healing skill every once in a while. In ESO you can spam these skills as long as your resources allow you to. For newer players, Guild Wars 2 is definitely less forgiving, which is why you need to prepare to die quite a few times while leveling. ESO requires you to learn animation cancelling to succeed in PvE content. This is fun if you like the challenge, but after a few years of light attack weaving, carpal tunnel syndrome is basically certain. New World's combat system is fun, but somewhat wonky. It uses individual skill cooldowns but does not have enough skills on the bars to allow you to always have something ready to cast. This is also true for Guild Wars 2, but only in the early leveling process. But with more and more skills that you unlock, combat becomes more engaging and very fluid. This is further enhanced by buffs that increase the rate of fire on skills or reduce their cooldowns like quickness and alacrity. Guild Wars 2 also breaks with the standard role trifecta of tank, healer and damage dealer. In raids you will find it on certain encounters, but especially in small scale PvE and open world, you do not have a reliable way to actually make enemies focus a particular group member. This means that damage dealers need to be aware of all of the fight mechanics because they need to deal with them. Enemies in instanced PvE will typically not have strong damage against a single target, but against the entire group through AoE instead. Again, raids are somewhat of an exception to this. The combat style relies heavily on the player. You have to know exactly what your skills do. Random button mashing will usually not do the trick in any kind of harder content. This is a good thing in my opinion because it requires people to actually think. Nonetheless, Guild Wars 2 is not a game reserved to high-end players that want to learn complex damage rotations and min-max every bit of their gameplay. I'm not part of that group myself, but I can hold my fair share in raids and fractals. As always in group content, at least try to do your best, because other people rely on you and you have made the choice to participate. Guild Wars 2 is an excellent MMO to play casually at your own pace, gradually increasing difficulty over time as you feel comfortable once you have acquired the necessary gear through other means. An example for a system that encourages that style is the fractal tier system. You start on tier 1 with quite easy puck-friendly difficulty, and with every fractal you clear, you move on up to tier 4 and challenge modes that require a lot of optimization and coordination within the group. Last but not least, I want to talk about the progression systems in Guild Wars 2 as reason number 5. First, you have 80 levels to cover. Depending on how you do it, this can take from a few seconds to many hours. For your first character, I do not think boosting to 80 is a good idea though, because it will overwhelm you, so try to at least understand how the game works first. For the leveling process, you start in a particular zone that is based on the race you choose. Until level 30, your personal story will be driven by the choices you made in the character creation. After that, you will have the same story on all characters, but the story also involves impactful decisions. You can join 3 different factions, for example, where each of them have their own story arcs that eventually align later on. During the leveling process, you will unlock skills and specializations via the hero point system. If you beat a particular hero point challenge, these can be a boss fight or any other challenge like poisoning yourself and then trying to survive long enough, you get a hero point that you can use to unlock a skill or trait. You level by basically doing anything, but grinding mobs is literally the worst way of leveling in this game. Completing events or crafting on the other hand are very good for it. Crafting alone can cover over 20 levels if you max out 3 crafting lines with experience boosters, and you need to do that anyway later on. What is really good about Guild Wars 2 is that it involves less power creep compared to other MMOs. The lead specializations have brought in some, since they are usually more powerful than not using them, but there is no constant gear treadmill. Once you have a full ascended set of level 80 Berserker gear, you can use it infinitely without it losing relative power, since after level 80, progression is almost exclusively horizontal. After leveling to 80, you unlock the Mastery system. The system requires you to do achievements to unlock mastery points that you can spend in different masteries. You can use Path of Fire masteries to improve your mounts, for example, so that the Raptor can perform much longer jumps, or the Sky Scale gains additional altitude. This system is phenomenal. The masteries affect your entire gameplay so that you feel more powerful with more masteries unlocked, but you will not be at a combat disadvantage to another player if you don't have them, and for group PvE you usually just need a few basic masteries to participate that do not take long to unlock. So if you decide to take a break and come back later, you will not find yourself in a scenario where everyone else vastly outclasses you because they farmed new gear. Both New World and Elder Scrolls Online involve longer term grinds of experience that you need to do to be as powerful as other players. New World has the expertise system once you reach level 60 that requires you to do endgame content to slowly progress on the expertise of armor or weapons, and ESO uses the champion point system, which unlocks combat passives with experience you earn after level 50. Guild Wars 2 doesn't really have that. Masteries are tied into the content you do anyway. This doesn't mean that you won't spend time out of your way unlocking them, but it happens rather passively while you explore the world. Aside from the more advanced Heart of Thorn masteries, most of them do not require that much experience to unlock anyway. So these are the 5 main reasons for why I think that Guild Wars 2 is a great game to pick up and it deserves more attention. It has a ton of content for both casual and endgame focused players. Even though it is quite old, it still has a lot of content to come as well, given how successful it still is. I could have listed many more positives and also some negatives. In fact, my list used to be much longer, but I think these points summarize pretty well what the game excels at. What do you think? Are there any points I missed? Do you disagree on some of these? Tell me in the comments. Also feel free to like and subscribe for the YouTube algorithm. I hope that this video was insightful for you and made you want to try out Guild Wars 2. See you next time and happy dragon slaying!